मन्नाथ श्रीजगन्नाथो मद्गुरुः श्रीजगद्गुरुः मदात्मा सर्वभूतात्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनम् देवकी परमानन्दम् कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। नमः कमलनाभाय नमः कमलमालिने नमः कमलपादाय नमस्ते कमलेक्षण यो ब्रह्माणं विदधाति पूर्वं यो वै वेदांश्च प्रहिणोति तस्मै तद्ब्रह्मदेवमात्मबुद्धिप्रकाशं मुमुक्षुर्वै शरणमहं प्रपद्ये। Seekers of divine bliss, as a regular spiritual custom, let us chant for a few minutes, and then we will talk about the subject. Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murari He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan Vasudeva.
Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nath Narayan वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा, 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 हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा, 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 हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा। हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारे, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा।
बोले वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की
जय।
श्रीमद सद्गुरु सरकार की
जय।
जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री राधे। Every living being is a fraction of God, as you all know. And God is the embodiment of perfect bliss. Therefore, every living being is proven to be a fraction of bliss. And since every living being is a fraction of bliss, it means that every one of us naturally desires, loves bliss, desires to attain bliss, happiness. Moreover, since every living being is eternal and unable to remain inactive for even a moment, a fraction of a moment, it means that we have all been working towards the attainment of happiness since beginningless time. And yet, in spite of our search for happiness since beginningless time, we have not been able to taste even a drop of it so far. Because had we been able to taste it, had we attained even a drop of that perfect bliss, divine happiness, we would have stopped searching for it. So we have been searching for happiness since beginningless time, and yet we have not attained it. Inquiring into the reason for this, the scriptures, the Vedas tell us that happiness can be attained only through God realization, only upon God realization. So thereafter, when we make an attempt to know God in an effort to attain Him, the Vedas tell us that God cannot be known. Why? For a number of reasons. First of all, He is divine, whereas our senses, mind, and intellect are material. The Vedas state, Divyo Himurtaha Purukhaha, Mundukopanishad 1-2. God is divine. Maya Gun Gopar. The Ramayana says, because our senses, mind, and intellect are material, they can only grasp that which is material. They are unable to grasp the divine. That is one reason. Furthermore, God is omniscient, He's all-knowing, sarvagya, whereas the individual soul is ignorant. Not only that, God is the abode of numerous mutual contradictions, numerous paradoxes. For instance, so let us take a quick look at some of these mutual contradictions. At one place, it is stated in the scriptures that God is greater than the greatest and yet smaller than the smallest. Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan. He is so small that he is even smaller than a grain of salt. He's even smaller than an atom, a proton, a neutron. He's smaller than the smallest thing imaginable. But immediately after calling him smaller than the smallest, the Vedas refer to him as Mahato Mahiyan, greater than the greatest, larger than the largest. He is so great that nothing is greater than him. In fact, the word Brahma, referring to God, in Sanskrit means the greatest. And the Vedas do not stop there. They further state, Neti netya sthula mananuhu, meaning he's neither big nor small. We can accept the fact that God is smaller than the smallest because he pervades even the tiniest creatures. And we can also understand that he is greater than the greatest because he absorbs everyone and everything into himself at the time of final dissolution, at the time of Pralaya. But it is impossible for us to grasp that he is neither big nor small. And yet, all the three statements about him are correct. What else? The scriptures describe that he is devoid of all sense organs. He does not possess, he's devoid of all senses, mind, and intellect. And yet he performs all the functions of all the sense organs. The Ramayana illustrates this point beautifully. Binu pag chalai, sunai binu kana, kar binu karma karai vidhi nana, आनन रहित सकल रस भोगी, बिनु वाणी वक्ता बड़ जोगी, तन बिनु परस नयन बिनु देखा, ग्रहई घ्राण बिनु बास असेखा, अस सब भांति अलौकिक करनी, महिमा जासु जाई नहीं बरनी. Meaning that he has no feet, yet he walks. He has no ears, yet he hears. He has no hands, yet he performs actions. He enjoys all tastes without a mouth. He is the most clever speaker, though devoid of speech. He touches without a body, sees without eyes, and can hear, can smell without a nose. All his ways are supernatural, and his glory is beyond description. So how can we ever hope to understand him? Elsewhere, the Vedas state he is one, yet he's many. He's inside of us as well as outside of us. He resides in all living beings, and all living beings reside in him. Ya atmani tishtati, ya upranasya pranaha, yasyatma shariram, etc. He is beyond virtue as well as vice, beyond cause as well as effect. He is beyond creation as well as its cause, that is to say, ether, air, fire, water, and earth. He is beyond the past, present, and future. Anyatra dharma danyatra dharma danyatra smat krita kritat. Kenopanishad 2:14 states he's neither virtuous, he's beyond virtue as well as vice. He is absolutely independent, yet he is completely controlled by his devotees. He's impartial, yet he loves those who are devoted to him. He is self-contented, Atma Ram Purnakam Paramanishkam, and yet he performs loving pastimes with the gopis of Vrindavan. For all these reasons and more, he's beyond the grasp of our limited and material senses, mind, and intellect. So finding this out, we become disheartened. But the scriptures again instill a ray of hope in our heart by telling us that although God is beyond our comprehension, he can be known. How? By attaining God's grace. So now the question arises, how to attain his grace? And has anyone ever attained God's grace in the past? Yes, countless souls have. If you amongst them are Tulsidas, Surdas, Meera, Nanak, Kabir, and so on. So now the question arises, if God treats everyone equally, then why hasn't he showered his grace? Why doesn't he shower his grace on everyone alike? Why have we not been blessed with his grace so far? Perhaps there's a condition that we must fulfill in order to attain his grace. And personalities like Meera, Nanak, Kabir must have fulfilled that condition and attained his grace, and thereby becoming eligible to receive his grace. So here, a serious question may arise in our mind, that if God bestows grace only after the fulfillment of a certain condition, only after we do something for him first, then why is he called the ocean of causeless grace, the ocean of causeless mercy? As the scriptures state. Aisa ko udar jag mahi, binu seva jo drave deen par, Ram saras ko nahi, aisa ko udar jag mahi. Vinay Patrika. So, if God bestows his grace only after fulfilling a certain condition, then how can he be called causelessly merciful? It would be more appropriate to call him a businessman instead, one may say. But in answer to this question, God says, you are charging me with a very serious crime. You are accusing me of being a businessman. But do you know what I demand from you in return for my grace? Do you know what price I charge for giving you divine eyesight, a divine mind, a divine intellect, and above all, divine bliss? So God says, why don't you give me a fair trial and find out what I take from you and what I give you in return. He tells us in Rig Ved, To dasyev sharana amahasya. I will bless you with grace only after you surrender yourself to me. He further states in Rig Ved, the moment you make a complete self-surrender unto me, I will take you across the ocean of Maya and fill you with supreme bliss. So, if you wish to attain divine property, divine bliss, divine love, then surrender to me. This is being repeated again and again in the Shvetashvatra Upanishad as well. It is written, Yo Brahmanam Vidhati Purvam. The verse I recited in the beginning of, in the Vandana, at the very beginning. Shvetashvatra Upanishad 6:18 also states, the individual who seeks my shelter attains my grace. Etadalambanam shreshthame tadalambanam param. Kathopanishad 1:2:17 also states, first surrender to me, then I will bestow my grace on you. And not only in the Vedas, but God tells us the same in other scriptures as well. In the Bhagavad, we read, Mamekamev sharana matmanam sarvadehinam yahi sarvatma bhavena yayasyahya kuto bhayah. 11, 12, 15, Bhagavad. He says, all living beings must surrender completely unto me. I am the sole shelter for all. And surrendering to me, you will become fearless. You'll be rid of fear. And in the Gita, once Arjuna asked Lord Krishna, he says, my Lord, you have told me that nothing is possible without God's grace, in other words, without your grace. But now please tell me how I can attain your grace. Again, Lord Krishna says, Tameva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharat. 1862. Arjuna, you will attain his grace only when you take refuge in him. Only then can you attain divine happiness and divine love. Mameviye prapadyante mayametam tarantite. 7:14 Gita. This is the one and only condition. Surrender yourself to him. Elsewhere in the Gita, Ananyashchintayanto mam ye janaha paryupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. 9:22. Again, Lord Krishna says, those who worship me exclusively with love and devotion and surrender themselves wholeheartedly to me, to them I preserve what they lack, provide what they lack, and preserve what they have, what they possess. And the Ramayana also, beautiful verse in the Ramayana, Man krama vachan chhadi chaturai bhajatahi kripa karat raghurai. In other words, as soon as an individual soul abandons all tricks and deceitfulness, tactics, and surrenders to God, he is blessed with His grace. Now, what do the great spiritual masters have to say on this subject? On the subject of self-surrender? Jagadguru Ramanujacharya ji says, Sarvadharmanscha santyaj sarvakamascha saksharan lokavikranta charanau sharanam te prajam vibho. O Lord, kindly bless me with your grace. I have renounced all desires, all dictates of even dharma, righteousness. Why? To seek the shelter of your lotus feet. Sri Yamunacharya ji, Saint Yamunacharya, expresses a similar sentiment in his scripture Alvandar. He says, Na dharma nishtosmi na chatma vedi na bhakti mastvaccharanarvinde akinchano nanyagati Sharanyam Tvatpadamulam Sharanam Prapadye. My Lord, I am neither virtuous nor intellectual, nor do I possess devotion in my heart. All my hope lies in your lotus feet, which provide shelter for destitute, for fallen souls like myself. Adi Shankaracharya states, Narayana Karunamaya Sharanam Karavam Tavakau Charanau Iti Shatpadi Madiye Vadana Saroje Sadavasatu. O merciful Narayan, grant me the shelter of your lotus feet. Yogi Shri Krishna Prem writes, in this world of dust and din, whenever anybody has given complete Atmahuti, that is, merging himself in the flame of love divine, there is an explosion, which is grace. He further writes, no true Atmahuti on earth can ever be in vain. Sri Aurobindo Ghosh also writes in his, on the very first page of his famous, well-known book, The Mother. He says there are two powers that alone in their conjunction can make effect. One, he further says, there are two powers alone in conjunction can make effect, which is the aim of our endeavor, which is the highest aim of our endeavor, of all our efforts. In other words, a fixed and unfailing aspiration which calls from below, and a supreme grace from above, which answers. In other words, if we surrender to Him wholeheartedly, He bestows His grace. And other scriptures also emphasize the need for self-surrender. Buddhism states, Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyam pi dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyam pi sangham saranam gacchami, Tatiyam pi buddham saranam gacchami, Tatiyam pi dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatiyam pi sangham saranam gacchami. Surrender to the Lord, and then alone will you receive His grace. There's no other way possible. The scriptures further state that it is true that God is kind, compassionate, and all merciful, but only if you surrender to Him. The Bible also states, God resisteth the proud, but giveth unto the humble. Submit therefore to God. Humble yourselves under the mighty hands of God, so that He may exalt you in due time. He may uplift you. You see, just as it is impossible to fill an upside-down container with water, despite a torrential rainstorm, if you put a container and you turn it upside down, it cannot be filled with water, despite a rainstorm. So in the same way, we cannot receive divine grace into a heart which is turned away from God. So what we have to do is to turn Godwards, to turn ourselves towards Him, in order to be blessed with His grace, which is being showered equally on everyone alike, day and night. Our present position is that we are like the number 36. We are turned away from God. And what we have to do is to face towards Him, become like the number 63, facing Him. So it comes down to this. If you want the grace of God, you must surrender to Him. If you don't want His grace, then there's no need. But you cannot attain His grace without surrendering to Him. So now we have advanced one step from where we stood a little earlier. How can one attain God? Through His divine love. Through the attainment of His divine love. And how can His divine love be attained? Through His divine knowledge. And how can His divine knowledge be acquired? Through His divine grace. And how can we attain His divine grace? By surrendering to Him. So now it must be clear, it has been clarified, that saints like Meera, Nanak, Kabir, Tulsi must have surrendered to God and attained His grace, and thereby attaining His divine knowledge and residing in His divine abode for all eternity. They must have fulfilled that condition of self-surrender. But there still remains the question, if God bestows grace conditionally, and now we know what that condition is, that condition is self-surrender, then why is he called causelessly merciful? Why is he called the ocean of causeless grace? So to get an answer, let us first take a look at the various kinds of actions we perform. All actions performed by us can be placed in two categories, good and bad. Good actions yield good results, bad actions yield bad results. Punyena punyalokam naiti papena pap mubhabhyam eva manushyalokam. Ved. They who perform good actions are sent, virtuous actions, they are eventually sent to celestial abodes. They who perform bad actions, evil actions, are eventually sent to demonical regions. And the third category of individuals who perform a mixture of good and bad actions are confined to this earth, to this material world. So the question is, now what we have to find out is whether surrendering to God is a good action or a bad action. You may say, it doesn't matter whether it's a good or a bad action. The fact remains that God will not shower His grace unless we do something for Him first, until we surrender to Him. So how can we call Him causelessly merciful? But the saints suggest that you hold off on your judgment until we find out the true meaning of surrender. What is the true meaning of surrender? Let us find out with the help of the Gita, Srimad Bhagavad Gita. In the very first chapter of the Gita, we read that Arjun reaches the battlefield of Kurukshetra and he sees the army of the Kauravas. He then declares to Lord Krishna that he will not fight against his own family, friends and kinsmen. Gandivam srasate hastat tvakchaiva paridahiyate. Gita 130. He says, my Lord, my Gandiv, my bow, slips from my hands. My body is burning. My mind, my head is reeling with confusion. I am unable to stand steady. And when Lord Krishna, so having said these words, Arjun, who was grieving at the time, cast away his bow and arrow and sat down on the back seat of the chariot. When Lord Krishna asked him the cause of his confusion, Arjun explained. He said, my Lord, all my kinsmen, elders and teachers are standing before me on the battlefield, prepared to give up their lives. But I do not see how any good can come out of killing my own elders and teachers. I have no desire for wealth, kingdom, or even life itself. For if all those whom I may desire all these things for are killed in the battle, I would prefer to be killed rather than fight this battle. I would be killing, if I fight this battle, I would be killing my own elders and teachers and friends, making women widows, children orphans. My conscience does not allow me to do this. But in the second chapter of the Gita, the same Arjun says to Lord Krishna, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhavah prichami tvam. And then he says, Shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapannam. Gita 2:7. So in other words, Arjuna says, my Lord, guide me, for I am extremely confused. Due to the bewilderment of my mind, I am unable to make a decision. So guide me. I am your fully surrendered disciple. I seek your guidance. Shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapannam. So here, Arjuna uses a very important word, and that is prapannam. You see, there are two terms, pan and prapann. Pan means external surrender, as when we lay our head down before the image of God and say to Him, Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva bandhuscha sakha tvameva vidyad ravinam tvameva sarvam mama deva deva, etc. In other words, you are my only mother. The word ev in Sanskrit meaning only has been used all through the verse. You are my only mother, my only father, my only wealth. You are my one and only. And yet, what do we really believe deeply in our hearts, in our heart of hearts? You are my only mother, but I also have another mother at home. You are my only wealth, yet I also have a bank balance as well. So in other words, we merely mouth these words without realizing the truth, the immense significance behind them. So one whose head bows before the image of God, before God, but whose mind remains attached to the material world is called pan. In other words, externally surrendered. But Arjuna says, I am prapannam, I am completely surrendered. I'm your fully surrendered disciple. Now, note, Arjuna did not say, I am your friend, I am your relative. He could have said that because he was Lord Krishna's first cousin, as well as his friend. But no, he said, my Lord, I am your disciple, please instruct me. What should I do? Lord Krishna then explained to Arjuna, Arjuna, turning away from your duty is a sinful action. Therefore, you should perform your duty. Arjuna said, all right. Arjuna was confused. So Lord Krishna said, not fighting the battle, if you do not fight the battle, it will be a sinful action. Arjuna wondered, how can not doing something be considered a bad action? Lord Krishna explained, Arjuna, turning away from your duty is a sinful action which will result in the attainment of hell. It is your duty as a kshatriya, as a warrior, to fight this rightful battle. So if you turn away from the battlefield, you will be neglecting your duty and you will have to suffer as a consequence. Arjuna thought, refusing to fight will lead me to hell, since I will be neglecting my duty. But my Lord, please tell me, what will be the consequence of fighting this battle? Then Lord Krishna replied, Hato va prapsyasi swargam jitva va bhokshase mahim. Lord Krishna said, Arjun, if you are slain in the battle, then you will go to Swarglok as a result of having performed your duty. On the other hand, if you emerge victorious, if you win the battle, then you will enjoy the kingdom, the sovereignty of the entire earth. So it's a win-win situation, since one of the two is bound to happen. Tasmad uttishta kaunteya yuddhaya krita nishchayah. Therefore, O Arjun, resolve upon battle, reach a decision. Make a decision. But Arjun was far-sighted. He inquired further. He said, my Lord, granted that I will surely be favored with either celestial pleasures, heavenly pleasures, or earthly pleasures. But please tell me one more thing. Is there peace and happiness in Swarglok? Will I find what I'm looking for in Swarglok? Lord Krishna noticed that Arjun was coming very close to realizing the truth. So he replied, Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam shine punye martyalokam vishanti. 9:21 Gita. Lord Krishna says, Arjun, the pleasures of Swarglok are only that of this earth, just perfected and heightened and perfected. They are also temporary, they are also limited, but just heightened and perfected. True happiness cannot be found even in Swarglok. Arjun thought, then even Swarglok is to be avoided, and I do not need to ask you about the pleasures of this material world, since I've experienced them all during my kingship. And I know for a fact that there's not even a trace of real happiness, true happiness, on earth. It means then, thought Arjun, that I'm trapped on both sides. If I fight the battle, I am doing my duty, as a result of which I'm doing a good deed, good action, as a result of which I will face the bondage of either earth or Swarglok. And if I refuse to fight, I'm neglecting my duty, which will lead me to the bondage of hell. Seeing that I face bondage either way, my Lord, what should I do that will release me from the bondage of hell, earth, as well as Swarglok? Lord Krishna answered. Lord Krishna said, Arjun, do not perform the action of fighting the battle, and do not perform the action of not fighting the battle. At the same time, fight the battle. Arjun said, my Lord, what kind of a riddle is this? Lord Krishna said, Arjun, the individual who succeeds in solving this riddle is liberated from the effects of both virtuous as well as evil actions, and he becomes eternally gratified. It is only the individual who reaches this stage of complete inactivity who attains supreme happiness, said Lord Krishna. So how can we reach this stage of complete inactivity? What is meant by the stage of complete inactivity, that is to do nothing. Is doing nothing another name for surrender? We will talk about that in our next meeting. So until then, बोले वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की
जय,
श्रीमद् सद्गुरु सरकार की
जय.
We have a few more minutes and we'll chant. गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
बोले राधा रमन भगवान की
जय।
वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की
जय।
श्रीमद सद्गुरु सरकार की
जय।
जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री